I, Major General Dipender Singh, Director CASA, on behalf of Team CASA, welcome you to the 30th CASA webinar and the third in our cybersecurity series. The overall objective of this webinar series, which has been spaced over 4 episodes of a fortnight apart, is to review cyberspace strategies and capabilities of major world powers, compare these with the status in India, and draw useful lessons. The series lays special focus on offensive cyber and cyber influence operations. In the first episode held on 3rd July, we had 3 eminent speakers, one of whom was Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, National Cybersecurity Coordinator in the Prime Minister's Office. In that episode, we reviewed the cyberspace capabilities of major players, their strategies and structures, and compared them with that of India's. We had also looked into the merits and demerits of adopting an offensive defense stance in cyberspace and the need for developing offensive cyber capabilities accordingly. Now, in the second episode held on 17th July, we had the former DGMO, Lieutenant General P.R. Kumar, the additional GG Police Maharashtra, Mr. Brajesh Singh, and a foremost cybersecurity expert in the country, Mr. Jiten Jain, who discussed the governance architecture to defend India's national cyberspace and spoke about how to strike the right balance among the charters of major organizations involved in defense of national cyberspace, namely MOD/Armed Forces, MEA/External Intelligence Agencies, MHA, and private sector. Whether the MOD/Armed Forces should play a pivotal role in the defense of national cyberspace with perhaps exclusive charter of offensive cyber operations in sync with their role in the traditional domains of land, sea, and air was also discussed. In today's webinar, we shall be looking at cyber influence operations, national strategy and structures. The objectives would be to discuss the specialized nature of cyber influence operations, which may be conducted through social/broadcast media, to brainstorm/recommend the strategies and structures to be evolved at the national level for developing capabilities to conduct cyber operations in the cognitive realm. To speak to us on this, we have 3 eminent panelists. The first is Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, PVSM, YSM, SM, member UPSC, and former General Officer Commanding in Chief Army Training Command. In a career spanning over 4 decades in the Indian Army, the officer has seen extensive service in the field. He commanded a medium regiment in the Eastern/Desert Theaters, an infantry brigade in counterinsurgency operations, an infantry division along the line of control in Kashmir Valley, and a pivot corps along the western borders. An alumnus of the Defense Services Staff College, Wellington, the College of Defense Management, Secunderabad, and the National Defense College, New Delhi, the general officer has served 2 tenures at the Military Operations Directorate, dealing with doctrines/force structuring, and was the Director General Perspective Planning, addressing issues related to military futures and force modernization. He has also been Commandant of the Indian Army's prestigious training establishment and think tank, the Army War College. A professional aviator, General Shukla has an abiding interest in strategic military affairs. He has authored close to 50 articles/publications and lectured and participated in more than 150 talks/seminars in India and abroad. As the 22nd General Officer Commanding in Chief of the Indian Army's Training Command, RTRAC, the officer made noteworthy contributions to India's strategic military futures, technological innovation, professional military education, and capacity building. General Shukla will be speaking to us on cyber influence capabilities/operations in China/Russia and recommendations for India. We welcome General Shukla and look forward to hearing his views. Our next speaker is Mr. Jiten Jain, who is a leading cybersecurity expert, having specializations in geopolitical intelligence analysis and mapping them in a global cyber conflicts. He is currently heading in Indian InfoSec Consortium, which is an independent not-for-profit organization of leading cyber experts in India. He's also the co-founder of Voyager InfoSec, a technological startup specializing in cyber threat intelligence. Jiten is a recipient of the Chevening Fellowship by the British government and has studied cyber defense and information assurance at the Defense Academy of the United Kingdom. Acknowledging him for his authority on as an authority on cybersecurity, Amity University has conferred him honorary professorship. Jiten is also a visiting faculty at the National Police Academy and Foreign Service Institute of the Ministry of External Affairs. He also previously served as cybersecurity advisor in Ministry of Electronics and IT. Mr. Jiten Jain will be speaking to us on cyber espionage, existing/recommended charter for MEA/NTRO, and recommendations for national governance architecture. We welcome Dr. Jain and look forward to hearing his views. Our third panelist for the evening is Lieutenant General PJS Pannu, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, former Deputy Chief of the Integrated Defense Staff. Commissioned into the Maratha Light Infantry, he commanded his battalion and brigade in Uri, J&K, LC, then a division at Tawang, LAC, and later 14 Corps, LC and LAC together, during a very challenging period. As Deputy Chief IDS, he raised cyber and space agencies and the Special Forces Division. Post-retirement, he is a much sought-after speaker and advisor to space SIA and defense tech startups. He will be covering cyber influence capabilities/operations of Pakistan/ISI and recommendations for India. We welcome General Pannu and look forward to his perspective. Our moderator for this webinar is Lieutenant General Dr. R.S. Pamvar, AVSM, SM, VSM, who was commissioned into the Indian Army Corps of Signals in 1976. He has commanded 2 logistic formations, an electronic warfare brigade, and an armored division communication regiment. His last assignment was Commandant and Military of the College of Telecommunication Engineering, which is a center of excellence for the Indian Army for information and communication technologies, cyber operations, electronic warfare, and artificial intelligence. He has the distinction of being awarded MTech and PhD degrees in computer science, as well as the coveted Distinguished Alumnus Award by the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, the first defense officer to hold such an honor. He has attended a one-day cryptology course at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, holds a master's degree in management from Osmania University, Hyderabad, and is a graduate of the prestigious National Defense College, New Delhi. Lieutenant General Panvar has vast experience in managing communications and electronic warfare systems and projects. He has done noteworthy R&D work as well, including the development of a sophisticated data communication equipment for tactical defense networks, for which he was awarded by the Ministry of Defense. He is presently a distinguished fellow at the USI and is engaged in involving strategic thought in the areas of information operations, network-centric warfare, and emerging disruptive technologies. He is also part of an international group of experts working on regulations for AI-enabled military systems. Welcome, General Panvar, and without further ado, it is over to you for the conduct of the webinar.
Thank you, General Dipender. At the outset, let me thank CASA for having me as the moderator for this 4-webinar series on cyber operations. And it's a privilege to be among such eminent specialists for this particular webinar. Now, the overall objective has already been outlined by General Dipender. I would like to stress that the scope of cyber operations being very wide, the series was conceived to focus primarily on offensive cyber operations and cyber influence operations. And the previous 2 episodes saw animated discussions on the former, that is offensive cyber operations. Passing reference were also made to influence operations conducted through cyberspace. Now, as has already been brought out, the objective of today's episode is to discuss the complex nature of cyber influence operations, which may be conducted through social as well as broadcast media, that is radio and television. We also aim to deliberate on strategies and structures, which is the main theme of the seminar. So let me begin by contextualizing cyber influence operations as a component of hybrid warfare. It would be fair to state that cyber influence operations are a very important but much neglected component of non-kinetic warfare. Moreover, while elements of non-kinetic warfare have always been employed in varying degrees by nations in conflict scenarios, it is the increasing potency of offensive cyber operations as well as cyber influence operations which has propelled the notion of non-kinetic operations into prominence over the last couple of decades. Now, I would also like to share a few slides. Just put them on. Are they visible?
Yes, sir, they're visible.
Yeah, okay. Right. So in general, all warfare waged by a state is a whole of nation endeavor carried out by leveraging comprehensive national power in all its forms. And I find that the DIME paradigm nicely captures the main elements of comprehensive national power. Here, the military element represents the kinetic operations, while the diplomatic, information, and economic realms are non-kinetic in flavor. It is to be noted that there are military components in two of the non-kinetic elements as well, namely military information operations and military diplomacy. Okay, so now because of the increased effectiveness of non-kinetic operations in a digitally connected world, leading military strategists have coined new terms to reflect the changing character of warfare, such as hybrid warfare in the US, unrestricted warfare in China, and new generation warfare in Russia, all of which are largely synonymous in meaning. That is a combination of all kinetic and non-kinetic means of warfare. Cyber influence operations are a very potent weapon within the information element of comprehensive national power. Now, while most CIO, that is cyber influence operations, may be conducted below the threshold of armed conflict, they would also be necessary during all-out conflicts, including for facilitating military operations. Arguably, the armed forces would need to play a significant role in both these scenarios. So I will now attempt to establish a relationship between military information operations and CIO. These days, most militaries, including our own, refer to a five-dimensional battle space construct comprising of land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace domains, with operations in this battle space being referred to as multi-domain operations. Now, in this five-dimensional construct, the term cyberspace requires some elaboration. As per Indian Army doctrine, information operation comprises of three main components, namely cyber, EW, and psychological operations. And for reasons which I could expand upon, I prefer the term cognitive operations over psychological operations. Now, if the fifth dimension is restricted to cyberspace alone, there appears to be no field of play for EW and psychological or cognitive operations. Therefore, cyberspace as a term here should be understood in its wider sense of infospace, encompassing within its ambit the electromagnetic and cognitive domains as well. Now, depicted on this slide are the three main components. I would like to highlight here that the conduct of EW and cyber operations, together known as cyber electromagnetic activities or CEMA, needs expertise in the information and communication technologies, while cognitive operations require experts grounded in the social sciences. So let's delve a little deeper into cognitive operations. Cognitive operations in the military context include several conceptually different capabilities. PSYOP are operations which convey selected information, not necessarily truthful, to foreign audiences in order to influence their behavior. Public information, also referred to as media management sometimes, aims to inform foreign as well as domestic audiences. Military deception is meant to deliberately mislead adversary military decision makers. And military diplomacy involves relationship building with foreign publics and military audiences. Finally, civil military operations are activities carried out to influence civilian populace for achieving operational objectives and are best characterized as actions that convey meaning. It is important to note that all these capabilities involve messaging in some form or the other. Now, while kinetic warfare is restricted to the physical realm, information operations manifest across multiple realms as indicated on the viewform. Cyber influence operations, the focus of this episode, are actually a rather complex confluence of cyber and cognitive operations, and in general are not restricted to the military realm alone. It is emphasized here that not all CIO require the use of specialist cyber expertise. Some CIO require merely the use of cyberspace as a medium, for example, dissemination of preferred narratives through social media platforms, requiring expertise only in the art of generating narratives. Others require cyber operations expertise, for example, a Cambridge Analytica type of operation. The former are referred to as cyber-enabled social influence operations, those which do not require cyber expertise, while the latter are referred to as cyber-enabled technical influence operations. I would also like to flag here that CIO involve a host of complex techniques and stratagems, mostly underpinned by social science disciplines such as psychology and sociology, which therefore need to be mastered. Now, amongst the global militaries and alliances, NATO seems to be seriously considering adding a cognitive domain as a sixth domain of warfare. Going even further, some military strategists have opined that the cognitive domain would be too restrictive, and that the sixth domain which deserves to be added to the battle space construct is the human domain. This view is based on the argument that an individual is not defined merely by the cognitive process going on in his brain. Every individual is embedded in an environment and maintains relationships within a society characterized by a set of beliefs and values. And it is these relationships, beliefs, and values which are under attack in modern conflicts. Trust between citizens and government institutions is also a prime target of cognitive operations. Cyber influence operations provide a very effective means of conducting these attacks. In addition to employment of information weapons, of which cyber influence operations form a major component, neuro weapons based on directed energy, nano, and biotechnologies could also be used to conduct cognitive operations. Another very important characteristic of cognitive warfare is that potential targets are not restricted to adversary combatants, but could cover whole populations. Now, this brings me to the final point which I wish to make. The way the laws of war are framed today, targeting of civilians is not permitted. It is noteworthy that in the context of cyber attacks, debates are ongoing globally for almost 2 decades now to figure out how international law applies in cyberspace without much progress. And taking a cue from this, in the context of cognitive warfare, where entire societies would be, and in some ways already are in the firing line, I would say that arriving at an international consensus on legal and ethical issues is a seemingly intractable problem. Now, with that as a backdrop, this episode seeks answers to the following questions. Given its unique characteristics and implications for national security, what structures should India put in place, both at apex and execution levels, for conducting effective operations in the cognitive domain, in particular through cyberspace? Since cognitive warfare is conducted against an adversary state, with political objectives quite the same as those which motivate the employment of kinetic force, should the armed forces play a pivotal role in the conduct of cognitive operations, both below as well as above the threshold of armed conflict? And finally, what organizational restructuring and capability development measures should be undertaken by the armed forces to conduct cyber influence operations? With that, I request the panelists to provide their views and insights, including country-specific as indicated initially, which might contribute towards answering these questions. Towards the end, before going in for the Q&A, I shall try and summarize as to what extent this episode has been able to address these pressing issues. With that, I hand over the floor to Jan Shukla. Over to you, Jan.
Thank you, sir. The President, management and members of CASA, this Current and Strategic Affairs Forum, very formidable voice on strategic affairs, as I've come to discover in a short while. The moderator, General Panwar, fellow panelists, Dr. Jiten Jain, General Pannu, and General Dipinda. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, since this is my first webinar with CASA, I'm extremely grateful for both the opportunity and the invite. Well, as is evident, I've been asked to speak on cyber influence operations, primarily looking at Russia and China, and thereafter drawing deductions in the Indian context. So in my allotted time of 12 minutes, allow me to just make a few key points. Having studied the Russians and the Chinese, I mean, if we are to draw conclusions from how they operate, my conclusions are that the very conceptual understanding of how the Russians and Chinese look at the information and influence space is very different. It comes from a very different cultural, ideological, historical, and philosophical perspective. So if that is the metric, then we'll have to completely rethink the vision, the models, the tradecraft, and statecraft as we look at cyber influence operations, and therefore revisit the entire paradigm of national security in cyberspace. And I'll tell you why. When you study the Russians and the Chinese, the salience that they accord to cyber is the same that they accord to the conventional and nuclear domains, in terms of how these three independent domains impact and influence the distribution of power in the international system. Now that's saying a lot. So just as you have a conventional military and you have a nuclear force, you stand up an information force, and both of them have dissolved all these silos of civil military. Talents, attributes from any domain come and converge to drive the information power of the nation. We could discuss this in the question-answer session. So cyber influence is far more than the hacking of websites and the manipulation, leveraging of social media platforms. It is far more than tradecraft. It is a matter of statecraft. Now, I'm not saying we copy what the Russians and the Chinese do. I'm just saying this is how they do it. And perhaps there are some lessons in our context. When I was saying it is a distinct domain with a gravitas of its own, it is a critical tool in the statecraft of these nations, as I said, to wield power through the national international system. So just let me give you two examples of how this transmission belt of influence operates. So from the west to the east, you saw how this influence was operating in terms of these color revolutions, impacting the political system. So what does Russia do in response? It creates a transmission belt of influence from the east to the west, knowing fully well that the Russian economy is tied to oil and to price points in oil, and knowing that shale gas is the competitor, it manages these protests against shale gas. So you have these fracking protests or protests against fracking from the environment point of view, but that's not the real issue. The issue is to challenge the west to east transmission. You first have protests coming up in Bulgaria, then they emerge in Poland, then in Hungary, then in Serbia, then in UK, then in France, and then they hop across the Atlantic pond to New York, where they are led by Mark Ruffalo, I'm told a prominent actor in America. So just as the West is exporting these color revolutions to the East, this is what Russia does in advance, in response. So the first thing, and I'm not making a comment, but I think we need to first and foremost develop a deeper and sophisticated understanding of the domain as the Russians and the Chinese do it. and then make our choices. We need to decide as to where we will position the cyber domain in our national security outlook vis-a-vis the conventional and the nuclear paradigms. Because that will take, a huge leap of faith. So the larger strategic choice is what we need to make if we are to become a formidable player in cyber influence or information operations. In my view, the Russians and the Chinese understood the salience of the cyber domain early, far earlier than the West and earlier than India. And they set the agenda accordingly. So how did they set the agenda? Now, in the Western frame, in the Clausewitzian frame, the Indian armed forces are also a product of the Clausewitzian frame. When political systems encountered irreconcilable ideological differences, they took these differences to a distinct battlefield and settled them through the mechanism of war. So you had this contest between Nazi Germany and the liberal West, which was settled through World War II. And the victor of the conquest, the liberal Western democracies, held sway, and their shadow of influence reigned over the Americas, across the Atlantic into Europe, and then the wider world. Had the fate of World War II been different, perhaps Nazi influence would have reigned. So wars were a mechanism leveraged by conventional militaries to settle ideological disputes and perpetuate influences thereafter. But with the emergence of cyber, as we all know, both Russia and China realized that here was a tool that you could leverage to exert extraordinary influence, impact the electoral fortunes of the world's only superpower, for example, the US elections in 2016, without crossing the threshold of war and peace. By the way, as an interesting aside, I'm told that Putin does not use a computer. Many of his close aides do not as yet use computers. Yet Russia is a powerful player in the World Wide Web. While in 2007, Russia launched its cyber attack on Estonia, its statecraft did not develop until the protests of the Russian people at the doors of the Kremlin in 2011. It was then that Putin and his aides saw how first Facebook, Twitter, Gonkate, I'm told the Russian analog of Facebook, was used to devastating effect and almost challenge and brought about the fall of the Putin regime. So just as the reform for the Russian army, the moment was the 2008 war with Georgia, it was in 2011 that this whole engagement with the cyberspace grew in the Russian system. And thereafter, we had that very famous hack and dump of 2014, in which a conversation between Newland, the Assistant Secretary of State in USA, and Pyatt, the ambassador of USA to Ukraine, was recorded and dumped. And the Russians said, listen, you say that we interfere in Ukraine, you are far worse. And of course, then they perfected it to 2016, the elections. Now that's very significant because here was a country which did not engage much in cyberspace, yet they discover how the Democratic National Convention operates, how the DNCCC operates, and using this fancy bear and cozy bear, which I'm told are basically stooges of the FSB or the GRU, they hack into this self-oppo, which is actually the research of the DNC into its own weak spots, and then pass it on to Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, and helped by Margarita Simonian, who's the founding editor-in-chief of Russia Today. So this very complex web, where you get RT in, you use the GRU, you use now non-state actors, and they create a tool of extraordinary influence, having understood the nature and great power, almost like, changing systems through the mechanism of war in World War II. So in an earlier era, reigning political systems or the nature and character of these systems were settled through seismic events like World War II. In the modern era, Russia discovered you could achieve the same political effect through the unobtrusive domain of cyber. Now, in the intensifying rivalry and strategic competition in the unfolding Cold War 2.0 between an America-led West and a China-Russia-led West, it is becoming a clash between two conflicting brands in the international system. So Xi and his cohorts are saying that, listen, the Chinese political system is better than the American political system. It delivers far superior in poverty alleviation, in economic growth, in terms of order. Much of Africa today agrees with China. French politicians say that in 20 years, the ally of France will not be USA, but will be China. So this is the power of the Chinese information system. And I can give you with many other examples how it is making great inroads into the Western infosphere. There is a whole lot of stream of content and data, led by people like Wang Yuning, Victor Gao, to reiterate that the Chinese system is superior. And they are saying that the main human right is development, economic delivery. And the fact that it is resonating reflects the great power of the Chinese information system. Now, I do not agree with the view. I'm merely pointing out to you what the Chinese think. And in the development and service of brand China, China knows the critical importance of an enabling in narrative. China is therefore determined to create an information network of its own, a Chinese cyberspace that is exclusive to tell the Chinese story. President Xi in 2013 at the National Meeting on Propaganda and Ideology said, create a network to sell the Chinese brand, to tell the Chinese story. And, this 5G is a very good example. When the Chinese saw that the Americans were falling back in this 4G, 5G dynamic, they gave 5G this huge push. It was incredibly ambitious. It was, of course, about a communication system of great power, communication power, low latency, and commercial opportunities. But it was also one set exclusively in Chinese technical standards. And if the West had not pushed back, it would have perhaps been the reigning information network of the world. And when you have a network set in Chinese technical standards, and the way the Chinese argue this is that they say that for decades we've had this information order set in American technical standards. Now we are the number 2 economy in the world. We will set the information order, technical standards and information. And this has given rise to Yuval Harari's catchphrase of a digital curtain. He says that the digital curtain may soon replace the Iron Curtain of the Cold War, where we'll have a Chinese info ecosystem rooted in 5G, WeChat, Weibo, so on and so forth, an American-led information system rooted in Google, Facebook, so on and so forth. China's Stein Ringen, a political scientist at Oxford, says that China's foremost export is influence, not trade and so on and so forth. So this is how Chinese are, investing in information, and all with the express purpose, as I said, of creating an influence ecosystem in the cyber universe of its own. So the Chinese ecosystem of influence in cyberspace, in my view, is grand in design and ambitious beyond measure. We cannot match it unless we step up our ambitions, take the game to an entirely new orbit, and develop a sophisticated understanding of the state of play. And look at what has happened. The Chinese ambition in the larger infosphere has also spilt over into the strategic military sphere. So you have the SSF, which is once again so ambitious. It says that the foundational metric for information operations is capture of the EM spectrum. So it is designed to completely capture the EM spectrum by converging EW space and cyber. Now, there's no time to expound on it, but the West is reacting in consequence. And it will ensure in any future crisis, conflict, complete domination of the larger information space. The Russians have, these concentric circles of cyber influence. So in Ukraine, they have these strategies: complete havoc. In the Baltic, destabilize. In Eastern Europe, co-opt power. In Western Europe, divide and rule. In the US, distract. In the Middle East, fan flames. And the overriding objective is to undermine trust in Western democratic institutions. Now, there is a disinformation chain that the Russians leverage, which is complex, based on multiple nodes, feedback loops, and there are ingredients to it: leadership, organs, and proxies like the FSB, the IRU, the RT, patriotic hackers, and so on and so forth. But that's a matter of detail. They have amplification channels like Twitter, Concate, and of course, they have the consumers. China's 3 warfare strategy, we all know about it: media and psychological. Much has been spoken about it, so I shan't say anything further, but the legal framework is important. What is the argument in the legal framework? They say that all these rules of UNCLOS and law of the sea, they were all created when China was not part of the system. I'll give you a very small story. I attended the IPAC, it's the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference in 2017 in Bangkok, where there was this Chinese general, and the whole day, the US lectured them on UNCLOS and laws of sea. In the evening, he comes up to me, and just to cut a long story short, he says, when you have 43 bases around you, and every day the Americans send a ship to course, is this coercion or is this, independent laws, the freedom of the seas? And having questioned that, he says in hubris, he says by 2035, the question will not be whether American ships stay 12 nautical miles of Shanghai, but whether Chinese ships stay 12 nautical miles of California. So the whole information dynamic is linked to their broader ambitions in international relations and statecraft. So if the influence pendulum swings decisively in China's favor, the very rules of law may be rewritten, and therefore this legal warfare in China's three warfare strategy. So what are the lessons for India? If this is what Russia and China is thinking, I think we would do well to rethink our vision, our models, our statecraft and tradecraft. In information, what is the Indian story? What is the katha and the kathakar? The story and the narrator. What is the technical platform for that narration? The story could be, okay, that through becoming a Vishwaguru by 2050. But how do you start selling the story? How do you work for it? What technical infrastructure do you create? And if we study this in depth, do we want to say that the informational dimension is as powerful as the conventional and nuclear dimension? In my view, yes. In my view, yes. But are we, I'll just take just one more minute. Are we structured in thought and in outlook to do that? And if we were to truly understand the power of the informational domain, then we will not come up with these, in my view, these cyber agency and these kind of structures. We will look at a cyber command, which will have, the best coders and code breakers. It has to be ambitious if we have to match up with the Chinese in this domain. And if we don't want to create a brick and mortar structure like the cyber command, there is the Israeli model, where you have a much smaller model, 8200, 9300, but you have the best talent pipelines. And there the question is not civil or military or MEA or MOD. It is just one integrated model where you have the best brains, career mobility, new talent pipelines. So currently we are focused only on the tradecraft. We first need to get the statecraft in the information realm, right? And then upgrade our tradecraft. Now, I'm not saying that whatever has happened is entirely unnecessary. I'm only suggesting that if this is the challenge that China poses, then we will really have to, upgrade our ambitions and our deliverables. Thank you.
Thank you, General Shukla. That was a really comprehensive and insightful exposure to Russian as well as Chinese cyber as well as influence operations, both combined. Thank you so much for that. Now I'll hand over the floor to Mr. Jiten Jain. Over to you.
Thank you, General Pranav, for having me here. I think I have heard one of the most interesting conversations today. I think the such clarity of thought, what General Shukla pointed out, I think usually I have not seen such clarity of thought in military or bureaucracy. But at least, that is how this is the first step of beginning any race, that where you realize where the start line is, where we realize where we are lacking, where we admit where, we have not probably progressed. And that is how we begin. So anyways, I would limit myself to a very, a limited point on practical aspects of IW and espionage. I'm sure speakers after me will speak a lot on policy, but I'll share 3-4 practical experiences what I have seen in last 6 to 7 years pertaining to IW. So we have done a lot of post investigations on the propaganda campaigns carried out by Ispr and ISI. Now, we as a nation have 3 choices today. One, what sort of structures we should have to deal with IW? Who should deal with IW? Should IW only focus on information warfare and propaganda, or should it be a mix of force which has more, multi-dimensional capacity in terms of hacking, content creation, content propagation, and art of narrative building. Should we have all these resources under one roof? And then if you have, then who should run it? Either should it be run by defense forces? Should it be run by MEA? Should it be run by MHA or internal security agencies? I think those questions can go on, and somewhere down the line we'll find an answer to those questions. But right now, what we need, as I also spoke in the previous conversation, is where is the skill set, where is the talent, and where is the capacity? I think so. Most immediate challenge is to look at the capacity we have. Is that capacity potent enough to carry forward our national objectives? And if we do not have that enough capacity, how do we create that capacity over a very short period of time? So now, if you look at Pakistan, I think in last 6 years, ever since Asim Salim Bajwa took over ISPR, we saw a definitive turn where ISPR, which turned from a so-called tri-services PR agency and from making those theaters, videos, and songs, they turned into a professional IW agency. They carried out narrative warfare. They exploited the world of social media. They dominated narratives on Twitter and Facebook. They started engaging with influencers across the world. They started breaking the monopoly of Indian influence over think tanks across the world. They found new allies in Western universities, which were influenced by ISPR proxies to write articles favorable to Pakistan. They found that probably narrative building has also got to do with Western and global experts writing in favor of Pakistan in unknown, unheard journals and influencing the citizenry of those countries, so that over a large period of time, there is a favorable construct building of ISPR. They also focus on dismantling Indian narratives. I mean, though I do not want to comment on what was right or wrong, but their claims that they took out a 150 strong network of so-called news websites run by Indian agencies and how they expose them. And if you look at the Orson investigation and then getting it published from a European agency, I think spoke volumes that apart from propagation of their own thought, they also were willing to detect and dismantle Indian narratives. And Indians were found off guard. And the situation has degraded further ever since Asif Ghafoor took over, I think 4 years back. So if you look at the conduct of Asif Ghafoor, you would suddenly find that in last 4 years, we have this unstoppable narratives of Indian Muslims in danger trending on social media, fake narratives and built up in Middle Eastern states where India's relationship is growing. I mean, creating fake accounts of Saudi princes, UAE's royal family, targeting, the elites in Jordan, building a narrative that Indian Muslims are subjugated by government every day. They are, their culture is being destroyed. There is no freedom of speech. How, Indian Muslims are now being treated as second-class citizens in India. Their mosques are being targeted. And if you suddenly find this, religion being a primary driver to destroy India's secular credentials in those very countries and creating a foreign policy conflict. And we have seen in last 3 years, statements coming out of Iran, Jordan, UAE, suddenly there is a spike, and all those statements are coming blaming Indian government for, probably discriminating against Muslims. They are mostly driven by the social media narratives being run in those countries, and most of them are run by ISPR. You take the example of Delhi riots, 80% social media content originated from Pakistan, with hundreds and thousands of fake videos collected from Syria, Afghanistan, Bangladesh riots, projecting themselves as, the pictures of riots on the streets of Delhi. I mean, unimaginable videos of a child being killed by stabbing, recorded in the streets of Syria. And it was shown as streets of Delhi that how Hindus were killing Muslims on the streets of capital of Delhi while US president visiting. Now you take the example of, very recently of this Nupur Sharma episode, 70% to 80% content which was propagating in Middle Eastern countries, especially Jordan, and then to South Asian countries like Indonesia against Indian culture and Indian secular credentials were all originating from Pakistan. And all those countries have fallen for it. Indonesia spoke against us. Dubai had a statement to make. Saudis had to caution. You saw statements coming out of Jordan and all those countries. But then there is an attempt to ensure that India does not get close to oil importing nations. The efforts of India to make an alliance in Middle East and South East somehow collapses. And to an extent, I don't think they've been successful in that effort, but they've been definitely successful in creating religious frictions in Indian society. They have been definitely creating, a situation where, or vitiating the atmosphere in India where one community is now pitted against another. In the last 3 years, you find the number of incidents of religion and communal violence are suddenly growing up, and most of them are coming in because of this food propaganda run by the propaganda factory of Pakistan, by Ispr and ISI. I mean, if you take the example of Muhammad Shami's case, where India's citizenry was trolling Muhammad Shami of calling him a traitor because India lost a match, and Indian captain to Indian political leaders had to issue a statement that this is not true. But suddenly you realize after a damage is done a week later that the 70 to 80% content in the initial 3 days came from ISPR. So how do you deal with that? Now, this is purely on the information propagation side, where you're targeting common citizens of a hostile country, creating religious frictions or exploiting any minus point in the society. Now, second is how do you use IW in the strategic domain in the times of conflicts and war? Take the example of Balakot. The Indians struck Balakot, I think, at midnight at 3:30. Our press release or press statement about the operation came in around, I think, afternoon around 12 or 1. The first statement informing the world that such a thing has taken place came from ISPR at 7 o'clock in the morning, where there was a tweet that Indian planes had crossed over LOC. They had to run back and they dropped some random bombs and 3 crores have died. Now, to detect that Indians planes have come in our territory at 4 a.m. in the morning to, and then to issue a statement from official handle at 7 a.m. in the morning. Those 3 hours were dark hours. I mean, 2 hours were night. Someone had to go to that hill and check what is the damage, whether we will be able to cover it up, whether we'll get exposed, were there clouds on whether India has a satellite imagery or not, leave apart all those logistical issues, but they were able to put out a statement at 7. And putting out a statement at 7 is not a great achievement. Being able to defend that statement throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the years is now where the capacity lies. Right from sending journalists, creating fake holes, building narratives about small hole or a bigger hole on the top of a building, nobody dying, cleaning up bodies, blood coats, everything. They were able to manage everything. And Indians, I mean, despite of we in the know of operation and we conducting it, it took us 7 hours in this entire bureaucracy to make out a statement that what has actually happened. But by the time we made a statement, the narrative of Pakistan has already come out, that there has been no damage. Now, on the second day, when Pakistanis targeted our bases in Valley and Abhinandan was shot down, this whole narrative of Pakistan that we have shot down 2 Indian aircrafts, then pumping in flux of videos of aircraft crashes picked up from old incidents from 7-8 years. I mean, there were visuals of Su-30 crashing in Northeast 2 years ago. Those videos of a plane crash in Valley, I think 3-4 years ago, to crash of a MiG in Rajasthan for many years. Almost 10 to 12 videos were circulated by ISPR just to convince their public and Indian public in the fog of war that we have shot more than 2 Indian aircrafts. Now, to carry and sustain that narrative, they played the video of the pilots, Nauman Siddiqui and Hassan Ali Khan, celebrating on the airbase and saying that these are the heroes of Pakistan, which have shot down 2 Indian aircrafts, and they ran those videos on every channel in Pakistan. Now, the objective was not to celebrate. There was a sinister design that because those videos were shot, they were shot in a front of a plane, and that plane was not F-16, but JF-17. So the primary objective of showing those videos was not how many planes you have shot down. The primary objective was to mislead the world to believe that their theory of not using F-16 throughout the conflict and the Indian plane be shot down by JF-17 of Chinese, this thing was being shown across the world. Now imagine, in the fog of war, you would not have known which pilot would have been shot down, which aircraft would have died, whether Indian will claim shooting an F-16 or not. But to have those videos ready of the pilots which are engaged in conflict and to shoot them in the front of a different aircraft and to run a narrative that we are using JF-17 to boost the sales and sustain all 3 narratives could not have happened on the same day. In reality, they likely had shot those videos in every pilot available in Pakistan in front of every plane for 1.5 years so that they can use that misinformation in times of conflict. And when we were investigating the crashes for 1.5 months, we were misled by the JF-17 video that how is it possible that video of a pilot, which they have officially confirmed in the parliament to have been shooting down Abhinandan, was actually standing in the front of JF-17 and celebrating. But later you figure out that it was or a targeted information warfare ploy where the content pipeline is created much before the conflict. and the adversary takes even, it would take weeks to, figure out what is the facts, what is fiction, what is disinformation, and what is intelligence. Now, second point I want to make that, in India, I think we have, in the most of the conversations we have had with the agencies which are deployed or involved in IW, they think that propagating a narrative or trending something on social media is IW. Agencies celebrating that we have had 15,000 tweets in Kashmir of Hindustan Jindabad or long live government of India is IW. I think this is not IW. This is IW on your own people. IW means that running those narrative in Pakistan, not in India. Trending something in India is not a victory. Trending something in Pakistan is what we have to look for. And then, this is where I think we are making fundamental mistake that, I have heard incidents that why don't we ask 1 lakh of our soldiers to create Twitter account and then we'll be able to trend anything and everything in the world, without realizing that whatever you post in India will trend only in India, not in the world. I think these fundamental mistakes of how are we operating, and it is happening because people, I'm very sorry to say, people who are in the decision-making capability are themselves have not been on social media because of work issues or because of restrictions or whatever. We do not have a culture of delegation of authority and decision-making. People sitting at the top, and especially in IW and cyber, wants to micromanage everything, which is the recipe of disaster in any classic IW operation. The subject matter experts or who are specialists in IW have literally no say on the decision making on table. They are usually standing outside the room when the decisions take place, maybe standing with a copy of a backup PPT in case something on a presentation goes wrong. They're not the part of conversation. And this is where Ispr is making a difference. Right from running a world-class fellowship program where they're hiring every, a graduate who have enrolled in a foreign university to do a familiarization tour of Pakistan, taking them to nuclear facilities, treating them how Pakistan is progressing, essentially turning them into intellectual warriors to defend the Pakistani narrative. They are getting the cohorts or the classmates of Pakistani students in Oxford and Harvard on Pakistan tours in a business class flight, taking them across Pakistan in a private jet, taking them even to Indian LOC near the border and telling them how Indians have been, firing randomly across LOC and killing innocent Pakistani civilians, and how Pakistan is a peaceful state. But we have not even figured out what Ispr does. And I'm sure I can bet on it that once when I gave a presentation at NOCB, everybody in the board was unaware that how many people actually does Ispr have, what is the strength of that organization. Somebody said 100, somebody said 200. In reality, there are more than 4,000 people. And out of them, 60% are civilians. We do not have any assessment of that.
Mr.
60%. 60%. Yeah, I'm winding up. Budget of 4,000 crores. It is unaccounted in Pakistan. Imagine a IW agency having a budget of 4,000 crores and then running this narrative campaign. So what I'm trying to say is that the wounds we are facing in IW from Pakistan every day, they have realized this is a low-cost weapon which can target. We used to target India every day, and we are suffering not because of the capability of our adversary, but because of inertia of our own bureaucrats and babus. We have not realized that even IW is now becoming a tool which is now detrimental to our foreign policy. The biggest casualty of Pakistan operated IW is our foreign policy. Every day we are seeing statements and condemnations of governments across the world. Why? Just because of the efforts of one single small miniature agency called Ispr, and we are not able to retaliate to them. So I think the time has come that in India we must realize what is the damage essential of IW and why should we have our independent agency operating on continual basis on IW and the resources needed for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jiten Jain. I know you have to leave shortly, and I don't see any questions in the chat as of now. Otherwise, I would have put them across to you. But I have a question for you on something which you stated, and that is you mentioned that capacities or structures or who should do what the charters can follow. Maybe we should build the capacity first, and the who should do what can follow subsequently. Now, the question which I have for you is, should the structures be first decided, at least in some form or the other, so that capacity development can take place, or can the reverse happen? I mean, which should happen first?
So we have to make a choice. we can decide if there is a scarcity of food, we can decide who will eat how much first, or we can decide first how to create, get the food and then decide who will eat how much. So in my opinion, I think we have to first look for the resources and the capability, and then we can decide who will use and how, in what quantum it will be used, in what structure it will be used.
I see. Okay. If any panelists have any questions for Mr. Jain before I let him go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think that was a very insightful one again, comprehensive, in fact, focusing on our Western adversary, Pakistan, and the potency of Ispr over the years. You brought out the important points about how reaction times matter and budgets matter, and you yourself brought out how the organization of Ispr itself matters. So thank you so much. That was a very informative rundown on this issue. Now I hand over the floor to General Pannu. Over to you, General.
Thank you, General Pannu. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, General Raj Shukla and Jiten. I think combined have brought in a good perspective on the influence operations using the cyber domain. Of course, cyber influence operations came in as a buzzword after the American elections of 2016, 2017. People started talking about it, how the influences came from outside as far as the cyber world is concerned. But what is important here to say is that the information and then later on the influence operations are really speaking a continuum of what has been happening earlier in an analog fashion. World over, the governments for their own people, to control their own people, have used different methodologies to extend influence of the policies and also extend policies and what ideology they want to sell to the outside world, and how the leaders are targeted, how nations are targeted, how populations are influenced to actually come down to achieving the strategic objectives of a person who starts the the influence operations. When we talk about Pakistan and we talk about China, both Jiten and General Shukla brought in the capability that both have and how they have been using it very successfully, as has been brought up by my past speakers. But what is important here is to understand that Pakistan and China have really collaborated on this field quite a bit. We've been talking about two-front war, collusivity of forces, and understanding how two-front war is going to be used in actual operations. But I think somewhere we have not realized that today what is a problem as far as cyber security is concerned or cyber operations is concerned, that we have a problem that we cannot trust our systems because we have a supply chain distrust. And most of the supply of our hardware or chipsets is coming from sources which is not trustworthy, but we have no other option but to continue to source it from that side. And therefore, most of the systems which are operating here, we have no idea how much it is infected and how much it is open for usage to outside. So therefore, when you talk about the China and Pakistan collusivity as far as manufacturing and the digital warfare methodologies is concerned, I think Pakistan certainly enjoys a big advantage because they don't really have to bother about the Chinese chipsets or the hardware. I don't think so. They have any problems with the supply chain infection. So they have created their own infrastructure in a manner where it collaborates naturally with Chinese, and they have given them the wherewithal not only to build the infrastructure, but also, I think, largely as world players for influence operations and as regional players targeting India foremost. Both nations are targeting India in their own manner. And with we not having a very strong cyber hygiene system, because we can't have it. So we've always had a problem. Now, really speaking, what Jiten has been talking about, the policies of the Indian government, the capability of Ispr and vis-a-vis Ispr, whether a response mechanism was good or bad. But the point is, speaking about Pakistan really is a case study, because there you can really describe a deep state. You can talk about ISI as a deep state or ISPR as the mouthpiece of the deep state. But I think deep state is no deep state if you can describe a deep state. I think it cannot be described. So therefore, Pakistan runs a deep state which is army-led. That is, of course, is known. And because it is army-led, therefore the themes and the controlling of the entire narrative is very well laid out. They have over a period of time realized that they have no option but to go for a low-cost option for warfare. They are the ones who've actually brought in proxy war and hybrid war and bringing it along with the special forces and bringing the non-state actors into it. In fact, Pakistan state is the biggest non-state ever created because all the technology which is being used by the non-state actors is actually where Pakistan can be seen as an example how a non-state actor with use of technology can influence operations, impacting the minds of people, and then coming down to achieving a correlation between if a military or a political objective is to be met. I think the information or the influence operations actually are very well collaborated and very well coordinated as far as Pakistan is concerned, because they write the narrative which is tightly controlled by one army. When you talk about the nuclear capability of Pakistan, I think they have sold their nuclear capability in a manner to psych the whole world and to ensure that the Pakistan as an establishment keeps taking support of their nuclear capability, and if it goes rogue, where are they going to head? And therefore, number of websites which they have created, the number of fake sites which they have created, in fact, fake Indian sites are created. If you Google something and you want to go to any information you want to see on a Google or any other platform, invariably you might land up, largely if it is concerning Indian security system and all that, it will land up on a deep states putting up a fake site. And as a result, over a period of time, you realize that the number of targets which the ISPR or the deep state in Pakistan have chosen have been very successful. They have been able to sell the theory of dismemberment of India. And of course, those themes were written. And I think all the deep fakes, as Jiten has spoken about, that how they are creating a problem between getting whole communities misunderstood, and they have achieved polarization in the biggest way. And then once you achieve polarization, it is very easy to infiltrate into the system. India, of course, is one of the largest users of Twitter, number 3rd in the world. We have large number of OTT platforms which are coming up. We are, I think, using maximum number of chat sites. And Indian population is increasing in a manner that I think we are going to have 1 billion smartphone users. And smartphone users would certainly get influenced directly from the propagator to the receiver. There is nobody in between. So as a result, if the Indian mind, which is being impacted by what the deep states of China and Pakistan combined are running, are really making sure that India remains in a state where we cannot be understood by the entire world, where today the geopolitics and the global problems are creating a churn and a global world order is realigning. India actually stands a very good chance here to emerge as one of the strong powers here. We are actually claimants to one of the most stable powers in the world. But I think it is the influence operations of Pakistan and China put together are creating the whole narrative by embarrassing India, by making sure that the string of pearls around us are also becoming a zone of influence for them. The Chinese are actually using trade, technology, and territory as 3 elements where they want to extend their influence. If the military has to go and occupy certain islands in the world, they have to go and occupy large areas in the Indian Ocean, they have or in the Pacific Ocean. They are the ones who are actually running this very successful by making sure that the string of pearls, not only around India, but around certain, in a way, all their opponents, they have actually been able to build this correlation of technology, trade, and territory extension of their influence. So really speaking, when you're coming to, of course, Jiten has given a lot of details about what happened during Balakot. I think one of the greatest things that Pakistan achieves that it obfuscates the real story. It builds a very powerful story which has got nothing to do with the actual happening on ground. And even if they have anything to do with the ground, I think they pick up certain things which have actually happened, then create a big story around, which is completely used by having a mass attack of information. And I think that is where Pakistan has been able to be successful. They have also used this against Afghanistan. They have been able to get into Afghanistan, create a void. I think Americans have been at the receiving end of Pakistan's information or influence operations. Uh, Americans have had no idea what Pakistan has been trying to do with them. They have actually gone into the American think tanks. They have gone into the American systems. They have gone into the European Union political establishments. They are actually running some certain parliaments because the narratives which are written by them are being spoken or being extended by the speakers within the parliaments or within the assemblies of certain countries. So as a result, whatever happens in Pakistan, they are having targets within their own population. They have to control their own northern area population, which is actually against them. But they have rented the whole area to China to come in. Since they have a problem, they have a problem with the Northwest Frontier Province. They have a problem with Afghanistan. So for each of them, they have a narrative. But the issue with India is that we have got a very, very large number of subscribers to the cyber applications. We have only concentrated on bringing down certain Chinese applications, but the point is that the target from where we are being targeted is nothing that we have been able to defend ourselves from. We have not been able to extend our influences into Pakistan or Chinese territory. We have not been able to largely impact the minds of Pakistanis or Chinese or even our neighbors. Our neighbors, in fact, sometimes run the entire information campaign, which is an imported campaign coming from Pakistan and China. And everybody understands what a neighborhood stands for. In fact, most of the SAR members have been against Indian influence into this area. And I think these are the narratives which have been very successfully run against India. So I think between both speakers, they had largely covered, the subject at large. But this is where I feel that there are concerns, and these concerns are only applicable to us, and we have to have our policies, we have to have our capability building in a manner that we not only run our own narratives well for our own people to understand, but largely be able to influence the matters across into the adversary's territory. Thank you.
Thank you, General Panu. Both Mr. Jain and General Panu spoke a lot about Pakistan's deep state and how they are going about it. Strength, and General Panu spoke about the collusivity between Pakistan and China in the info space and how we've been unable to respond appropriately. So this is where it stands. So I come back before I go into the Q&A session. I would like to come back and ask the questions which I initially flashed and spoke about. What is it that we should do about this? What structure should be created? Now, the way I see it, the contending agencies for creating this capability is, one is the armed forces, because it is a fight against an adversary state with strategic effects. So it's a fight in the cognitive domain. So armed forces is a contender. Then we have external intelligence agencies, like, for example, the RAW and NTI. And you have the third leg, which is the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, because the broadcast media is involved in a big way to create influences. So amongst these three legs, how should we go about, what should be this apex structure, or who should be executing what? If there are any suggestions in this regard, if I may throw it to both panelists, starting with General Shukla, I'm sure you have ideas on this.
So, primarily, I'll tell you where I see the problem. So everybody understands it. In the last Swavalamban, that Navy Swavalamban seminar, no less than the Prime Minister was saying कि अभी ये जो जल और वायु की लड़ाई है ये अपनी जगह है, but cyber space को आप शामिल करिए. So everybody seems to be aware of it. But I think the primary reason is there are three things. There is not a deep enough understanding. There is expertise, but it is scattered. And we certainly lack the talent. I'll tell you why I say so. If there was a deep, and I'll give you an example. The Ukrainians have managed to stall Russian cyber attacks because teams from the US Cyber Command teams from the US Cyber Command, these forward hunting teams have been deployed in Ukraine since 2018. The Microsoft has deployed threat and identification centers for the last 3 years. Starlink terminals we know. So this is the kind of talent which has come, and that answers the question why the Russian cyber attacks have not been effective enough. Now, in our case, why don't the Eastern and Northern Army commanders say that cyber agency ki forward hunting team should be deployed here? If they value space, they will say that enough of this SBS, I want a LEO terminal created here. And once they do that, they integrate these domains, they will see the great effect it will have on conventional operations. So that understanding the value is not there, which is there in these countries, which other countries that we are quoting. Now, this business of who should do it, I think this will never happen in our case. Some kind of select committee should say that this is the brightest name in cyber. This is one man who understands the information space. Whether he comes from MEA, from the Culture Ministry, the Armed Forces, or anywhere, he's given his team and he's asked to drive it. Otherwise, this is not going to happen. Jiten will also have his ways. And secondly, we have to understand that in some of these domains, civil talent just has to come in. So US Cybercom, I've met the CEO of US Cybercom, like Jiten was saying, 60% of US Cybercom are the best minds in cyber. And I was asking him, I say, sir, don't they leave? Because, talent leaves everywhere. He says, no, I found surprisingly that the big tech companies, their retention rate was 40%. Mine was 70% because many of them just come for the prestige associated with cyber command. But they were wanting career mobility. So what is happening now? If you're very good in cyber, you come for 4 years, go to an academic position, you return 3 years. Now, these kind of changes have to happen. If cyberspace and these kind of issues have to really take off. The Prime Minister has been talking so many times about the strategic communications. What is our grand narrative? Unless we have this grand narrative, we will not.
My God.
I think we've lost him for a while, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think General Shukla, I thought I had lost the link. So
No,
fine. I'm sure he'll be back. In the meanwhile, General Panu, there's a question also, which is from Dipendra Mandrai, which says, can an Indian version of Ispr work across party lines? Now, building on this question itself, and again, the type of question which I threw earlier, what do you feel? I mean, how should we go about? You mentioned that Pakistan is a deep state, and in collusion with China, another authoritarian state, they've been able to, develop this capability. How do you feel that India as a democracy and the way we function, how should we build about a counter to the SSF, the MSS of China, and the ISPR and ISI of Pakistan? What would you suggest?
I have a couple of points towards this but to keep it short, I would say the first thing is that you want to create something which is effective, you have to empower it. So empowerment is the first point. To build institutions and make them run at cross purposes, we have a number of institutions which have come up. They have all been given some charter or the other, but if you really go into the charter of these institutions, you will find there is an overlap. But at the end of it, if you ask a question that who among all this is a coordinator, you will never get that answer because none of them are completely empowered. So the apex of empowerment will only make sure that the themes are written, the themes are actually then implemented in a manner which brings to a success of what the origin of the objective was, whether it has been achieved or not, because the accountability and the performance will then rest on the same head, which is empowered, somebody who's been empowered. The second thing is that we have in our systems, we have not synergized ourselves. Like, for example, we were building a National Defense University. In the National Defense University, all the technocrats, bureaucrats, the military experts, anyone having any experience or exposure or are to be used for security or the defense work or business, were supposed to be all trained together so that we understand a problem as a common problem and we come up with solutions which are common solutions. You cannot have one government having a perception completely at variance from the other part of the government or other ministry. So we don't have a synergy because we are not trained together. So institutions such like the National Defense University or the IDU, which has been in creation for almost a couple of decades, and I was one of them who I thought when the entire draft bill had been made, I thought it is just a matter of 6 to 8 months that the bill would be tabled and it will be passed in the parliament, but we have not heard anything of it yet. So I think that is where again our minds are not working on the same line because we're not trained together. I will also give an example, and since we've donned uniform and we cannot speak openly about it because indirectly people will inference some policy inadequacies. But here everybody understands that today when you are preparing for war, you are thinking of preparing for war on the borders. And now that what General Shukla was talking about, that okay, the three domains, of course, Army, Navy, Air Force are traditional ones, but now you're talking about the fourth and the fifth frontier, which is the cyber and the space. And the cyber and the space, when they come up and coming down, there has to be a synergy between not only the three services, but also with the border guarding forces. Border guarding forces are the actual ones who have the boots on ground. They have the capability, they have the budget, they have everything empowered except the accountability and the responsibility of defending the borders. That accountability of defending the borders still lies with the army, while army is not present there. Now, the moment you have to convert this into a digital warfare pattern, you will find that if you want to make a smart frontier is not going to be used by the military because there is no war. And if smart frontier is built all by the border guarding forces, they will build smart frontiers to their own requirement, for their own objectives to be met. The mandates given by the MHA. But later on, if this has to be then converted from the no war to low intensity border clashes to a full spectrum of warfare, the digital connectivity or linking or networking between all these agencies would emerge as one of the greatest weaknesses. And I don't think so. We are sitting together and investing our minds that how all the three services and how the border guarding forces and all the agencies involved are to be networked together so that we have a common operating picture. And common operating picture is not only during hot war, it will come to the army, and now when it is not hot war, it is going to the MHA or it is going to some police forces. I think common operating picture has to come together to a couple of people in the same way, in the same manner, so that they draw their own inferences and they have their own plans and they have their own preparation, so that once they are informed, they're going to work together to train and then perform together. I think this is this is the key to what I understand about where we should head. And of course, when we talk about having confidence in our systems, I think the entire confidence has to come through our own manufacturing. And I think industry, the military, and these agencies have to come together. You cannot have industry as a pariah to say, oh, businessmen, industry, don't talk to them. I think we have created a huge gap and mistrust between business and the military or the government and the business. I think they have to sit together as one people, one Indians. I think that is where. So I think empowerment and synergy are the two takeaways in what I'm coming down to.
Thank you, General Pandu. I think General PR is also on the Q&A. In fact, he's given a remark which endorses what you're saying. Says that having studied, I fully endorse General Shukla, having studied the structures of the apex level, they're operating in their silos with very little cross communications or exchanges, and this extends to these additional agencies which you're talking about. So I think because of the time we have, there's time for one last question, and which is from Manjul Saxena. First, there's an observation. Pakistan is creating false anti-India narrative, and Mr. Jiten Jain is right. This can also be seen in the comment section of influential financial newspapers like Financial Times, etc. So the question is, are Indian policy makers taking Indian stability for granted? Is there a lack of urgency amongst Indian policy makers? How can this be changed? General Shukla, would you like to take this on?
I do think
Indian stability.
Sorry, sir?
Indian stability, is it being taken for granted by the Indian policymakers? That's the thrust of the question.
I won't say Indian stability is being taken for granted. Let me make, I'll answer the question in a different way. We somehow assume that change is happening only in realms disconnected from national security. So while we have really stepped up our ambitions in other domains, because responding to global change, we have somehow assumed that national security is static. It is my view that there is humongous change happening in national security. The point that General Pannu was making. We still treat business as pariah. I'll tell you what the Americans have done. The Americans have gone and created an Army Futures Command. Now, this is not they did it on their own. They were pushed by the Chinese. And what is the mandate of the 4-star who commands the Army Futures Command? It is not merely to look at futures, but to look at futures and drive technological innovation to the field, because they saw that innovation coming out of all these emerging technologies was left in Pentagon and seminar rooms, not being taken. So now he has given up a budget and told you take it to the field. What is he doing now? He forms cross-functional teams. So cross-functional teams will have 2 businessmen, 2 startups, an academic and domain specialist, no silos. Under a brigadier, they fly to IPACOM. IPACOM tells them in outline, of course, not the finer operational details of how they generally operate. This team comes back and figures out the technologies that they will need, and thereafter creates a prototype, and in 2 to 3 years delivers the product. Here we still treat business as pariah. We are, General Pannu is aware, I'm aware, everybody is aware. Against the great push to startups, we are not placing orders. So they need orders, they need this kind of stuff. So my answer is that, the question is that we need to step up our game everywhere. Our ambitions are not as much as they should be. So that is where it is, and I can make one more point. I hope it's not controversial. When we were young, we blamed the political class of not understanding. And we said, they don't understand. It has been my experience in the last 3 to 4 years that the political class is saying, do this, do that, do this. We are unable to come up with solutions. Now, why should the military, which always prided itself in being ahead of change and delivery, be laggardly? That's my question. That's the sad point. And unless that happens in all the areas that General Pannu pointed out, so on and so forth, we will not match up to the change that is happening in the national security dynamic.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In fact, that last point which you made which you said might be controversial. I am, of course, endorsing that point of view fully from my own perspective. And you mentioned the Army Futures Command. In the area of artificial intelligence, in a similar manner, the US had set up the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center with exactly the same types of things for inducting artificial intelligence per se into all the services. So that's the way it has to be done. And Indian Armed Forces have to step up their game is one of the things which needs to happen. With that, I think I'll hand over the floor to General Dipender because we are already at the end of our time. And over to you, General Dipender, for the closing remarks.
Thank you, sir. This was an extremely illuminating webinar. And it's actually ironic that when we have the software capability in our country to drive everything, like when we talk about CEOs of Google, they're from India. You have Infosys, you have Wipro, and most of the people who are in this cloud, technology, or when you talk about blockchain technology or IoT, etc., they're basically Indians. So I think we have to get our act together and not be behind when it comes to the world in this particular sphere. All that remains for me to do is to thank General Shukla, Mr. Jiten Jain, General Pannu, our moderator, General Panva, Mr. Mahadevan Shankar, who's down under in Australia, Ms. Barnali Singla Roy for her excellent technical support, our wonderful participants, and of course, a special thanks to our CASA founder and director, General Gautam Murthy, who, even though is on holiday outside the country, was always in the pilot seat, digitally steering this webinar. Well, we look forward to everyone's presence on the 14th of August at 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time for episode 4 of this series, which is on cyberspace operations, role of the armed forces. And for this, you will get the registration link and it will be sent to all who have attended this webinar, and also to those who have not been able to do so. Thank you all once again. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.